For generations, the sons of KISLEV have fought and died on the barren plains of the far north. Chaos raids against the south are common in a land so close to the chaos waste, and this endless stream of warfare has only made the people of this land hardier than those of the weaker south. After years of constant conflict with the northern marauders, the Tsar or Tsarina have ordered the establishment of several forts occupying the southern end of High Pass and Black Blood Pass, usually garrisoned by several hundred men under the leadership of a March Boyar to watch for any sign of an upcoming invasion. As the years have gone by, these raids have grown more fearsome and numerous, and the tribes of the Ungol grew uneasy as their hags and shamans foretold a great gathering of powerful eldritch energies from the far north. The power of the dark gods began to grow stronger and stronger in the chaos waste over the millennium, and war drums were sounded as the armies of the north gathered for the great slaughtering that was to come. Cold northern winds blew particularly strong, and portents of doom were abound, heralding those with magical insight to see the great storm that was coming to consume them all. On the winter of 2301 IC, a powerful Kurgan chieftain, Asavar Kul of the Kul tribe, led a massive invasion force of Chaos warriors towards the very heart of KISLEV itself, heeding the calls of the Dark God with his new title as the Ever-Chosen. When the tribes came south, some called it the Great Slaughtering, the God-calling, the coming of the storm, but by those of the weaker southern realms, this invasion was known as the Great War against Chaos. In response to this, a force of KISLEVite and Imperial soldiers was mustered and faced the oncoming hordes just north of the city of Prague, between the towns of Murmograd and Chazask. The Allied army was unfortunately surrounded and massacred, underestimating the sheer size and numbers of Kul's army. Advancing at the western foothills of the World's Edge Mountains, the Chaos Horde had also managed to subsequently destroy a contingent of KISLEVites defending the last operational bridge on the river Linsk, and Kul's forces crossed the last barrier between it and the city of Prague. For much of the spring and summer of 2301 IC, the Chaos Army besieged the Ungol city of Prague, the so-called Bastion of the North. For months now, the Chaos armies under Kul had made daring assaults against the city's walls. But the sheer ferocity of the defenders' courage proved just as fearsome as the Northmen themselves. The city walls stood high and proud, and the city's defenders hurled back their attacks time and time again with desperate heroics and the use of their deadly skills of the bow. But it was not the sword or axe that proved the downfall of this great city, but one that the KISLEVites thought was their greatest of weapons, In the winter of 2301 IC, starvation began to run wild in the streets of Prague. Unable to feed its numerous populace without the produce made by the now destroyed local farms. Though the winter cold killed far more Chaos warriors than Kislevite defenders, the meager defense that the city had left after the season's end proved insufficient to hold the walls, and at the end of winter, Prague had fallen, and the Chaos hordes ran amok in its streets. With its downfall, the raw powers of Chaos engulfed the very city, like a never-ending tide of pure mutation that corrupts everything in its path. And the bastion of the North was changed forever. Its survivors were fused together in hellish, inhuman shapes. Living bodies melted into the walls of the city, so that it became impossible to tell flesh from stone. Distorted faces peered from the walls, agonized limbs writhed from the pavement, and pillars of stone groaned with voices that came from once human throats. Prague had become a living nightmare, and a grim warning of the suffering that lay ahead if the warriors of the Dark Gods were victorious. Before the downfall of the city, the current Tsar, Alexis Romanov, sent a plea for aid against the Chaos hordes that were assailing his gates. The first to heed the call was the Elector Count of Ostland, whose army was subsequently destroyed just north of the city of Prague. Unlike the Elector Count of Ostland, however, the other Elector Counts of the Empire grew terrified, believing that all hope was lost and that the end times had truly come. Weakened by the age of 3 emperors and the endless streams of mysterious crop failures, rampant disease, and rife mutation amongst the many provinces, hidden chaos cults from all over the empire had instigated uprisings to further disrupt the imperial war effort, hoping to gain favor from the invaders once the empire had fallen. One particularly powerful chaos cult called the Magi led the largest of the uprisings, using their powerful Zine sorcerers to summon forth demons and horrors upon the city of Nuln. Those who remained loyal to Sigmar prayed for deliverance, receiving an answer in the twin-tailed comet that soared in the night sky. Magnus the Pious saw the comet, and inspired by his grounding in the Church of Sigmar, used his influence as a minor noble to rally the people. Under Magnus's leadership, Nuln was liberated from chaos, with Magnus taking up his crusade across the empire. A massive army was being assembled from the Elector Counts and other powers, either swayed by Magnus's tongue or afraid of any refusal to aid the growing force. It became the largest army ever assembled within the Empire in its long and war-torn history. Eventually, Magnus reached the city of Middenheim, where he sought an audience with Jarl Ulrich Christoph to gain support for the war. After Kristoff denounced Magnus as nothing more than a charlatan, Magnus walked through the sacred flame of Ulrich, a holy site of the Church of Ulrich, which separates the pure from the tainted, and the truthful from the liar. After miraculously emerging unscathed, Magnus had proven the righteousness of his cause, and gained the support of a powerful ally. Magnus tactfully appointed Kristoff as the leader of his cavalry force. With the aid of Peter Laszlo, the personal ambassador of Magnus, Teclis, Lord Master of the Tower of Huth, had also joined Magnus's regime, along with 2 other very powerful wizards. With his forces ready, the army began to march on towards the north. Knowing that the army was too large to be able to reach Prague on time, Magnus ordered Kristoff's cavalry force, consisting of vengeful KISLEVite winged lancers and glory-hungry knights, to ride with all speed towards the beleaguered city. Night and day, the Imperial and KISLEVite horsemen rode to aid their brothers of the north, envisioning great horrors that were to come to the people of Prague if they were too late. Sadly, however, it all came true the day the army reached the outskirts of the city. Prague had fallen, just a few short hours after the arrival of the army. From off in the distance, they could hear the screams of dying men, the screeches of butchered women, and the cries of children as they saw their lives go up in flames and bloodshed. The Imperial army stood quiet and grim on that sorrowful hill, weeping small tears as they watched the last of the Chaos Army finish up their bloody works. With the fall of the city, several hundred dwarven warriors from the city of Karaz-a-Karak had marched ceaselessly towards the capital city of KISLEV, hoping to aid in its defense. With the last Chaos Army having left the shattered city of Prague, the Imperial Cavalry Army hunted the rear guard of Asavar Kul's horde, destroying them utterly without Asavar Kul's knowledge. Magnus, on the other hand, was marching his force towards KISLEV as well, hoping to resupply before heading toward Prague, naive of the events that had befallen the city. Upon his arrival in the outskirts of the city, he saw the capital besieged by the Chaos Hordes, with only a few detachments of KISLEVites and a contingent of dwarves desperately fighting to keep the enemy at bay. Seeing the event as dire, Magnus immediately ordered the charge towards the enemy's rear. Surprised by the sudden arrival of the massive Imperial army and the unstoppable power of Teclis' magic, the Chaos lines began to waver as grim-faced Imperial soldiers drove a wedge deep into the enemy ranks. Just when the Chaos hordes began to buckle by this sudden assault, Asavar Kul rallied his greatest warriors and used their greater numbers to encircle Magnus's army. The relief force began to get bogged down by the greater number of their enemy, and Magnus was forced into a defensive position as the horde began to close in all around them. On the city walls, the battle between the forces of chaos and the Imperial Relief Army was seen by the Kislevite defenders. 300 dwarves broke out of the city gates in an attempt to try and reach the Imperial Relief Force, but they were beaten back, only half of their numbers returning to the beleaguered Kislevite capital. When it seemed that all hope was lost to the defenders of the city, the Imperial cavalry, which had been sent to relieve fallen Prague, appeared on the northern horizon, on the so-called Hill of Heroes, and launched a devastating attack born of hatred upon the Chaos Horde. Watching the enemy suddenly broken by the appearance of the Imperial reinforcements, Magnus spurred his men on to one last Herculean effort to relieve the city. Seeing that the forces of order had gained some momentum, the gates of Kislev were opened, and the Kislevites and their dwarven allies spilled forth to slam into the army of chaos from yet another flank. Caught between 3 separate offensives on every side, the Chaos Horde slowly disintegrated, and a mass rout soon ensued. The plains of the city grew thick with Northmen blood and bodies, as the Kislevites brought dire hatred upon those that had destroyed their beloved homeland. The remnants of the Horde fled back to the north, where they faced the dire punishments of their failures to their gods. The body of Kul was never found. Even as the armies of the Kislevites massacred the last of the Northmen invaders, the damage was beyond repair. Kislev was in ruins, its populations massacred, and its cities turned to rubble. For more than a century, this state of affairs had lasted, with none of the Tsars having enough power, wealth, or even having the sense of duty to reconstruct all that which their forefathers had worked so hard to achieve. Taking advantage of this distraction, all manner of foul creatures took up residence in unoccupied areas of Kislev, killing off those few villages that had survived the initial invasion force, and becoming an ever-present threat to those that left the comforts of the south. Such things had only gotten worse when one of their own, Tsarina Katarin the Bloody, became one of the dreaded vampires and did a secretive and bloody massacre on the population of the city of Kislev that had given her that rightful name. Only the intervention of her own son, Tsarevich Pavel, had ended her reign of terror over the land. But even this new Tsar did little to ease the pain of a ruined kingdom. And it was only in the year of 2491 IC that a new and true ruler of Kislev rose up to aid his people in this dire time. In the heavily forested woodland areas just east of Kislev, near the borders of the World's Edge Mountains, the then ruler of Kislev, Vladimir Boka, died fighting goblins that had infested the region since the Chaos invasion several hundred years earlier. This Tsar was the first in his line to actually take up arms and ensure the safety of his people by doing a systematic campaign of purgings throughout the lands of Troll Country, the northern oblast, and the eastern woodlands of Kislev. Vladimir's son, Boris Boka, was crowned the next Tsar of Kislev after his father's demise. Boris Boka was a fiery, passionate warrior, and it was said that he was born with the sound of the blood heart howling on the winds above him, a good omen for a warrior of Kislev, and the hags and wise women had prophesied that he would fight hard and die well to ensure the safety of his kingdom. Boris continued his father's work for years, emptying the treasures of his own family to hire mercenaries to retrain the Kislevite armies, rebuilding bridges, roads, and towns, as well as importing large sums of black powder and imperial engineers from the Empire to aid in his wars and massive construction projects. Though it almost bankrupted his family and several other noble families in the bargain, Tsar Boris's reign would be forever remembered for his driving spirit and eagerness to reclaim the lands that had become the domains of goblins, trolls, beastmen, and other foul things. During his first few years as Tsar, Boris and his army of highly trained Kislevite warriors had also beaten a beastman horde in the outskirts of Prague, earning Boris the title as the Red, a testimony to the gruesome massacre that had unfolded upon the beastman army. Tsar Boris was also instrumental in the revival of the cult of Ursen, the original religion of the Gospodar people, which had slowly been overtaken by the worship of Ulrich, Tal, and other foreign gods. To do so, he undertook the trail of initiation that the priests of Ursen must overcome to join the order, and went to the forest to tame himself a wild bear. He was not seen or heard of for 18 days, and many feared he had met a gruesome fate in the depths of the icy forest. Preparations began for the coronation of his infant daughter Catherine when the search parties came across his unconscious form on the 19th day of the search. His still body was guarded by a bear of monstrous proportions, and the beast would not let anyone near him. The Tsar was also surrounded by the corpses of over 24 massive wolves, and the snow was red with their blood. Nothing the searchers could do would entice the bear away from their ruler or convince it that they meant no harm. Finally, after another day had passed, Boris awoke, and the bear allowed the searchers to approach and tend to their ruler's wounds. The tale of Boris, related upon his return to the city of Kislev, has since passed into folklore, though few doubt the truth of it. 4 days before being found by the searchers, and after much wandering, he came across the mightiest bear he had ever seen, with teeth and claws like saber blades, and muscles that bulge with wiry veins. Taking this as a sign from Ursen, he had confronted the beast, and it charged at him, the ground shaking with the fury of its charge, and the blood-curdling roar echoing throughout the forest. With his bare hands, he fended off the creature's attacks, but could not overpower it. The struggle lasted a full day before a massive wolf pack, drawn by the scent of their combined blood, attacked. The wolves immediately went for the bear, but Boris sprang to its aid, crushing the skulls of the wolves with his fist and tearing them from his back. Boris was badly wounded during the fighting, and the Tsar fell to his knees and sank to the ground, unconscious. As the beast closed in for the kill, the bear protected his erstwhile enemy from the common foe. It stood over the supine Tsar, tearing the wolves apart with its claws and savaging them with its powerful jaws. Boris had slipped into unconsciousness, yet each time he had drifted awake, the bear had been there, protecting him from the wolves. After being found, the bear returned to KISLEV with the Tsar, and from then on, whenever Boris took to the field of battle, it was atop the back of his mighty companion, Urskin, meaning bear brother, both a symbol of Ursen's power and affection for Boris, and an implacable enemy in battle. In the year of 2517 IC, after much campaigning and purging in the northern oblast of KISLEV, the once mighty Tsar fell at a battle near the borders of Troll country, whilst leading a polk of Kislevite horsemen. At an unnamed river crossing, the Tsar charged deep into the Kurgan army of Hetzar Feidaj, but was soon surrounded and cut off from the rest of his army. He and Urskin fought with all the might and fury of the bear god, but even Red Boris could not triumph against such odds. Urskin was able to fight his way clear of the Kurgans and carry the Tsar back to the rest of his army, but it was already too late. The Tsar had taken a score of lethal wounds. Only when the battle was won did the Tsar slide from the back of Urskin and die in the cold, hard ground of the Kislevite Oblast. The army of Kislevite were aghast and mourned his passing, whilst his faithful companion Urskin roared in mourning for a full night before vanishing into the bleak Northlands. And legend has it that to this day Urskin continues to hunt down the creatures of chaos that slew his master. With the death of Tsar Boris, the now fully grown Katarin became the new Tsarina of Kislev, the latest in a long line of rulers descended from the ancient Khan Queen of the Gospodars. She rules with a cold majesty, beloved by her subjects and feared by her enemies. But barely 4 years into her reign, the land began to shake as the drums of war echo throughout the lands of the north, as the greatest invasion since the time of the Great War against Chaos will forever decide the fate of her new kingdom. The end times have begun.